drop. They walked through the living room, checking corners, looking behind furniture. Jonathan followed them around, pointing out more damage, a brick someone threw through the kitchen window, threatening notes shoved under the door. The officers asked about weapons and Jonathan shook his head, said he didn't feel safe having guns around when he was this stressed. I had to look away because the lie came out so smooth. A black sedan pulled up and Detective Thompson got out. Tall guy with gray hair. He nodded at the patrol officers and walked straight to Jonathan, said this was the 4th time he'd been called to this address in 2 weeks, but something about him was different from the other cops. He actually looked at the damage, took pictures of the spray paint, picked up one of the bricks with gloves on. He asked Jonathan to tell him everything from the beginning. While Jonathan talked, the detective wrote in a small notebook, asking real questions, not just going through the motions. After 20 minutes, the patrol officers left, but the detective stayed. He walked around the house again, this time looking at angles, checking sightlines from the street. Sarah came to the door, and the detective let her in. She ran to Jonathan and hugged him, crying into his shoulder. Jonathan just stood there with his arms at his sides. The detective watched them for a moment, then said he'd be in touch. After his car pulled away, Jonathan stepped back from Sarah. He thanked us for stopping him, said he almost gave them what they wanted, almost proved them right, but his voice was empty, like he was reading lines from a script. Sarah started crying harder, saying she was sorry for everything, for not standing up for him at school. Jonathan just stared at the wall behind her. About an hour later, a Range Rover screeched into the driveway. Sarah's parents got out, her dad's face purple with rage. He pounded on the door so hard the frame shook. When Jonathan opened it, her dad grabbed Sarah's arm and yanked her toward the car. He said if Jonathan contacted her again, he'd call the police, get a restraining order, make sure Jonathan never saw her again. Sarah fought back, screaming that Jonathan was the victim, that everyone was destroying him. Her mom grabbed her other arm, and they dragged her to the car while she kept screaming. Jonathan watched from the doorway without any expression at all. After they drove off, he closed the door and walked back to the basement. I followed him down, and he went straight to his computer. He pulled up folder after folder of video files. Every attack on his house was there, filmed from hidden cameras he'd installed weeks ago. The egging, the spray paint, Brad's crew surrounding him, even tonight's police visit. He said he was building a case, either for court or for after. I didn't ask what after meant. He showed me timestamps, dates, faces clearly visible in the footage. He had their names typed out, their addresses, their parents' phone numbers, everything organized in spreadsheets like evidence files. I went to use the bathroom upstairs and noticed his bedroom door was open. Under his bed, I could see textbooks sticking out. When I pulled them out, they were chemistry books, advanced stuff about reactions and compounds. There was a notebook filled with formulas, diagrams of molecular structures. I shoved them back, but my hands were shaking worse now. Jonathan called up asking if I wanted pizza, and I said sure, trying to sound normal. Sunday morning came and we were still in the basement. We ordered Domino's and put on Netflix, pretending everything was fine, but I kept looking at where the gun was hidden behind the cushion. Jonathan caught me looking and said I was scared of him now too. Said that was good, maybe I'd survive this. I tried to laugh, but nothing came out. My phone started blowing up with notifications. Brad had posted a video online, yesterday's scene at Jonathan's house edited to make it look like Jonathan had threatened them first. The video already had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. People were calling for Jonathan's arrest, saying he should be locked up, put in a mental hospital. Some comments had Jonathan's address, his photo, even his grandma's obituary. Jonathan read them over my shoulder, his face blank. The house phone rang and Jonathan put it on speaker. Principal Foster's voice filled the room, saying he was scheduling an emergency meeting for Monday morning. He said there were serious concerns about Jonathan's threatening behavior toward other students. Jonathan started laughing, real laughter but wrong somehow. He hadn't been to school in 2 weeks, but somehow he was still the threat. After he hung up, Jonathan walked upstairs to his parents' room. I followed and found him standing in the doorway. The room was exactly how they'd left it, except for Brad's spray paint across their bed. Jonathan said he used to come here to smell their clothes, to pretend they were just at work. Now it just smelled like paint and broken glass. His voice cracked and he covered his face with his hands. The doorbell rang again and we both jumped. Detective Thompson was back, standing alone on the porch. He came in and sat at the kitchen table, pulled out his notebook again. He said he'd been investigating the pattern, found similar cases at other schools. Kids targeted until they snapped, then blamed for the breakdown they'd been pushed toward. He looked right at Jonathan and said Jonathan wasn't the first, but they could make sure he was the last. Thompson pulled out a thick folder from his bag and spread papers across the table, pointing at donation records showing Brad's dad had given the school $300,000 over 5 years. His finger moved to transfer records of 6 kids who'd left Westfield High after run-ins with Brad, their parents' complaints buried in administrative files marked resolved. Jonathan stared at the papers while Thompson showed us emails between Brad's father and the principal, messages about keeping things quiet and protecting the Mitchell family reputation. I felt sick looking at photos of other kids Brad had targeted, their faces hollow like Jonathan's was now, reading their parents' desperate letters that went nowhere. Thompson explained how Brad picked vulnerable kids, ones already dealing with problems, making them easier to break and harder to believe. Jonathan just sat there tracing his finger over one name, a kid who'd attempted suicide last year after Brad's campaign against him. The detective needed Jonathan to testify, to finally stop this pattern, but Jonathan wouldn't even look up from the papers. I realized this went deeper than just bullying when Thompson showed us psychiatric evaluations from 3 former students, all diagnosed with PTSD after their time at Westfield. Jonathan finally spoke, saying justice wouldn't bring his parents back or fix what he'd become. Sunday afternoon, the doorbell rang and Coach Harrison stood there holding a box of old game tapes, his face looking older than I'd ever seen it. He came in and admitted Brad's father had threatened to pull funding from the entire athletic program if he helped Jonathan, had made him choose between one kid and 40 others. The coach set up his laptop and tried playing highlights from when Jonathan was quarterback, touchdowns and team celebrations, but Jonathan walked out of the room before the first play finished. Harrison followed him to the living room and revealed he'd been keeping records of every time the administration ignored reports about Brad, had emails and meeting notes going back 3 years. He needed Jonathan to help him take it to the school board, to finally expose the cover-ups, but Jonathan asked why he should save other kids when nobody saved him. The coach left the tapes on the coffee table, said he'd be at the board meeting Tuesday whether Jonathan came or not. I found Jonathan later in his grandmother's old room, sitting on her bed holding orange prescription bottles, counting pills she'd saved over months of cancer treatment. He said she'd been saving them for when the pain got too bad, except she died before she needed them, and now here they were. The way he held those bottles, turning them over in his hands, made my stomach drop because I knew what he was thinking without him saying it. I grabbed the pills, but he didn't fight me, just sat there staring at where they'd been in his hands. That evening, Sarah showed up even though her parents had forbidden her from coming near Jonathan's house, carrying a backpack full of printed screenshots and USB drives. She'd been collecting collecting evidence for weeks. Recordings of Brad bragging about driving Jonathan crazy. Witness statements from kids too scared to speak up publicly. Photos of the vandalism and harassment. She spread everything on the kitchen table, begging Jonathan to fight back the right way, through the system, to let the evidence speak instead of violence. So Jonathan had cameras recording everything this whole time? The way he organized all that evidence in spreadsheets makes me wonder if he planned to get pushed this far, or if he just started preparing when things got bad. Jonathan listened, then went to his room and came back with 3 binders, each one labeled with dates going back 6 months. Inside were his own records, every incident documented with times and witnesses, copies of reports he'd filed with police and school counselors, recordings of Brad's threats, photos of injuries, even security footage he'd somehow gotten from local businesses. He showed us responses from authorities, form letters saying they'd investigate, case closed stamps on reports, emails from the principal suggesting Jonathan consider transferring schools for his own well-being. Sarah started crying, looking at how thorough he'd been, how hard he'd tried to do things right before everything fell apart. We were still going through papers when we heard engines outside, Brad's truck and 2 others pulling up, music blasting and voices shouting. Bottles started hitting the house, glass breaking against siding and windows, Brad's voice screaming about Jonathan being a psycho who should just kill himself already. Someone got out with a baseball bat and started smashing the mailbox, the metal clanging with each hit while they laughed and filmed it. Jonathan stood up calmly and walked to where he'd hidden the gun behind books on the shelf, loading it with the same mechanical precision I'd seen in the basement. He said they wanted a monster, so maybe it was time to give them one, and started walking toward the front door. I tackled him from behind and we crashed into the coffee table, wrestling for the gun while Sarah screamed for us to stop. The gun went off, the bullet punching through the ceiling and sending plaster raining down, the sound so loud it made my ears ring. Outside, Brad's crew went silent for a second, then tires squealed as they sped away, not knowing they'd almost died, thinking it was just another night of fun. Jonathan went limp under me, like the gunshot had broken whatever spell he was under, and we just lay there breathing hard with Sarah crying above us. Within 3 minutes, Detective Thompson was at the door, and I realized